What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our SEC channel. It's time for my 5 takeaways from Week 1 in the SEC. So we'll start with my biggest takeaway, and that was Tennessee. Tennessee, based off of what I saw in Week 1, can challenge Georgia in the SEC East, and they will be able to challenge them in their game. Before the season started, I wasn't too sure. I thought that if Georgia was going to lose a game, that would be the game. But I never really felt confident that Tennessee was going to be good enough. But again, based off of 1 week, and we probably overreact here, but based off of what I saw against Virginia, this looks like a Tennessee team that's going to have a real shot to beat Georgia. You look at their defensive front. I mean, that's where they really impressed me in this game. We knew the offense would be good. But the defense, and maybe it was just Virginia. Maybe the Virginia's that bad, and maybe I'm overreacting. But based off of what I saw in that game, they look to have a much improved defense, especially up front. And then the offensive line was good. But we knew receivers, running back, they had plenty of talent there. I thought Milton was good. I thought he was solid. He missed a few throws, but he made a lot of plays, made a few plays with his legs. And I think this offense is going to be just fine. And I think with an improved defense, yes, Tennessee can potentially challenge Georgia. Georgia didn't look great against UT Martin. I don't want to read too much into that. And it's, new offensive coordinator, new quarterback, first game of the season. Yes, you're playing an FCS team. Some running backs banged up as well. So, I don't want to read too much into that. I don't think Georgia's going to be bad or anything like that. But it's more about what Tennessee did. And I think that has a chance to be a game that will decide the SEC East. I think Tennessee could definitely go into that game with maybe just one loss. Georgia probably going to be undefeated. And so that game is really setting up to just be a huge game. All right, number 2 takeaway. LSU, they've got work to do. We saw some good and we saw some bad from LSU. I love the first half. They played really well despite not, situationally not making some big plays when they had fourth downs. You could have had a lead going into the half, but didn't take advantage of those opportunities. Didn't have the opportunity to take a lead, and it really came back to get them. I thought Florida State was the deeper team, the faster team, the more physical team, and LSU just didn't look like an elite team. I think LSU's still going to be good, but they didn't look like a playoff contender. Let's just put it that way. And I still think the talent's there. I think this was a bad matchup for them, especially in the secondary, but I think LSU is going to be okay, but they've got work to do if they're going to repeat as SEC West champions. I still think that's a possibility, but I think it's, based off what I saw, it's going to be tough. And making the college football playoff, I think that's going to be really tough as well. So work to do for LSU. Not a great performance against Florida State in that second half. They wound up getting blown out, and we'll see if they're able to bounce back. Number 3 takeaway, Alabama isn't going anywhere. So there was this narrative out there this offseason that Alabama was, it was over. The dynasty was over, and it may be, but this narrative that they were going to lose 3 or 4 games this year. I did pick them to lose 2 games because I just didn't know without Bryce Young how good this offense was going to be. And I think that the jury is still out on that. We have to see them play a better team, and we'll get that opportunity when they play Texas on Saturday. But I thought Milroe was good in this game, threw the ball well. They didn't ask too much of him there, but his legs, what he can do running the football, that's big time. And it reminds me of this offense with Jalen Hurts. And so maybe you don't have the passing game you had with Bryce Young, but you've added an elite runner back there. And so I think the offense is going to be just fine. Now, if they get into a game where they have to throw the football, we'll see. But I think you can maybe win the SEC, maybe get to the playoff without that. Can you win a national championship without that? I don't know. It's going to be very tough, but the defense looked really, really good. The offensive line, they've got monsters up there. And so Alabama looks like the team to beat in the SEC West, especially with LSU struggling. But keep an eye on Texas A&M. We'll talk about them in a second. Let's go to the number 4 takeaway. Florida and South Carolina's offensive lines are terrible. That was my takeaway. That was really the reason why both of these teams played as poorly as they did. Florida against Utah, and I'll give Florida the benefit of the doubt a little bit here because Utah's a really good team, and we know they've got a good defensive front. So maybe Florida's not that bad. We'll just have to wait and see when they play some other games. We don't have a lot to go off of right now. But they really struggled up front, and if they continue there, If you can't run the football, if you can't protect Graham Mertz, it's going to be a very long season for Florida. Same thing for South Carolina. They were really bad, and I don't think North Carolina is that good. I don't think they improved that much on the defensive line. So South Carolina with a lot of work to do. I had my questions about South Carolina. A lot of people said I was hating on them or whatever because I picked them to go 6-6, but there were a lot of question marks for me with this roster, and that continues after this loss to North Carolina. So both of these teams, they've got to get their offensive lines fixed before they can really do much. I think if they don't improve there, I think both teams could actually miss out on a bowl game this year. But plenty of time, and offensive lines usually get better as the season goes. So I'm not saying the season's over, but just like LSU, these two teams have a lot of work to do, and specifically on the offensive line, because there are some bright spots in other places. All right, let's go to the number 5 takeaway. Everyone else took care of business. So, we can kind of run through the games quickly here. Not a lot to take away from these other games. We can start with Missouri on Thursday night. Didn't look great, but the game was never in doubt. They were up 28-3 at halftime against an FCS opponent, but it was kind of what I expected. So I didn't really learn a whole lot from that game. I do believe Brady Cook will be the guy for them at quarterback. Talked about Georgia earlier, struggling a little bit. We were pretty far into the second quarter. I think the score was only 7-0. When you beat a team 48-7, it's different when it's 17-0 at halftime versus 38-0 at halftime. It's a kind of a different story there. It took them all 4 quarters to get those 48 points. In fact, they scored the most points in the fourth quarter. So this was not, you see that score and you think, wow, Georgia took care of business. They dominated. That doesn't really tell the whole story. But like I said, don't panic. Georgia, I think, is going to be just fine. We touched on Alabama, Tennessee, the struggles of North Carolina. Ole Miss, they took care of business, 73-7. The offense was out there lighting it up. Jackson Dart over 300 yards passing, and this offense is going to be good once again. Texas A&M was really impressive. They were up 35-7 at halftime. The plays that they made in the passing game, those are just plays they were not making last year. So I think you can definitely see some major improvements there. And by the way, back to South Carolina, they had a lot of injuries in that game. They had some guys banged up going in. They lost some players during the game. So injuries definitely a big part of that as well. But the offensive line, I think, was the main issue there. Kentucky 45-14 over Ball State. Kind of like Missouri, they look pretty good, not overly impressive, but it was week 1. Arkansas rolled against Western Carolina. Although their run game was not very good, KJ Jefferson was solid, so we'll have to watch that. Again, first game, not going to overreact too much. Auburn blows out UMass 59-14. To be expected. Although, 59 points, I was surprised. They used Robbie Ashford in the red zone as a runner, and that is going to be a serious weapon moving forward. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more from Peyton Thorne. He didn't have a great game, but again, week 1, new team, not too concerned there. Mississippi State rolled over Southeastern Louisiana. Another performance that wasn't great. They scored the majority of their points in the fourth quarter, just like Georgia, but the game was never in doubt. They took care of business. And Vanderbilt beat Alabama A&M 47-13, so a nice bounce back for them. They also scored their most points in the fourth. They scored 21 points in the fourth quarter. That was their highest scoring quarter. So, you look at these scores, and first you think, well, they dominated, and they did overall. But like Vandy, Mississippi State, Georgia, they didn't get up by a ton at halftime and then put in the backups. It wasn't quite like that. So, but they took care of business, and that was the takeaway here with these other teams in the SEC. They all took care of business. So the big winners, I thought Alabama and Texas A&M were really impressive. Nobody really won a big game. Florida State lost, South Carolina lost, Florida lost. So not a good week 1 in the SEC, but still a long ways to go. We're just getting started, and some big opportunities coming up with Texas A&M taking on Miami, Alabama taking on Texas, Auburn taking on Cal. So plenty of non-conference games, big games for the SEC to show why they still are the top conference in college football. What were your takeaways from week 1? Let me know down in the comments below.